Please leave our home immediately and clear out all your belongings, which are cluttering the space. As Susan waved me off, clearly frustrated, Stephen interjected, insisting that I shouldn't leave any mess behind. Feeling utterly disheartened, I quietly agreed, then turned away from them both. It puzzled me why, after being caught in wrongdoing, they were so unapologetically bold, demanding I leave so they could cohabit. Their audacity seemed boundless, yet I wondered if they considered the compromising evidence I held against them. Nonetheless, I decided to let them revel in their illusion of victory for the time being, as I plotted my next steps with a sly grin, retreating to my sanctuary. My name is Abigail Ruth, and I have been sharing my life with my husband, Stephen, for around 2 decades. At 45, I'm a home-based designer, while Stephen, 4 years my elder, excels as a systems engineer. Our son, Gary, born shortly after we wed, is now 21 and diligently pursuing college studies. Despite what sounds like a picturesque family life, the reality is far from it. Stephen's recent actions, sneaking out and returning home late, have ignited suspicions of infidelity within me, leading me to contemplate divorce as the inevitable resolution to our marital discord. Reflecting on the past, I recall a shift in Stephen's demeanor years ago during a financially tight phase, exacerbated as our son entered middle school and expenses surged. Despite the downturn in Stephen's income, attributed to a struggling economy and company woes, my attempts to address our financial strain only provoked anger in him. His unexpected outburst over my concern for our finances and his generalized dissatisfaction with his colleagues marked a significant deviation from our usual disagreements, leaving me to navigate our challenges in isolation. This narrative unfolds the unraveling of a marriage strained by suspicion, betrayal, and financial woes, highlighting the complexities of familial relationships and the personal resolve to face adversity. Before tying the knot, a former colleague from my previous job, who had recently embarked on her entrepreneurial journey, reached out for assistance. It had been years since I'd left that position to get married, and despite the long hiatus, I couldn't pass up the chance. Enthusiastically, I took up her offer, marking my foray into home-based design work. I shared the news with Stephen, but his reaction was lukewarm at best. He acknowledged it with a simple, "Okay," showing little interest in the details. Regardless, I had made it official to him and dove into my work with dedication. One day, to my surprise, Gary came home early, disrupting my workday. It was unusual, given his schedule packed with school and extracurricular activities. "I'm home early because of midterms," he explained, which I had completely forgotten, despite it being marked on our calendar. As I rushed to prepare lunch, Gary noticed my work setup in the living room. Apologizing for the mess, I promised to tidy up soon, but he brushed it off, more interested in sharing something else. Gary had been developing a game, aspiring to follow in his father's footsteps as an engineer. His project, though not as refined as mainstream games, was an impressive effort. He expressed his desire to attend a vocational school to pursue this passion further, hopeful for his father's support. However, when Stephen saw the game, his response was far from supportive. He dismissed Gary's hard work as trivial, even mocking the effort. I couldn't hide my anger at his demeaning attitude. While Stephen might view the game as simplistic, his approach was harsh and entirely inappropriate. As I defended Gary's independence and efforts, Stephen's annoyance grew, challenging my stance on parenting and education. This incident highlighted a fundamental disagreement in our approach to supporting our son's ambitions and respecting his individual pursuits. Stephen's frustration echoed loudly, accusing me of negligence, which led me to silence. Arguing seemed futile. My priorities shifted towards supporting Gary independently. I absorbed Stephen's grievances quietly, waiting for his temper to cool down. The following day, with Stephen away, I offered Gary a solution. "I'll get you a computer for your game development. If your dad questions it, I'll say it's for my work." This decision to buy Gary a high-quality computer, funded from my own resources, drew a skeptical look from Stephen, but I stood firm, stating it was a necessity for my job. This event further strained the already tense relationship between Stephen and me, pushing me to consider divorce, a thought complicated by Gary's well-being. As I navigated these turbulent thoughts, Gary embarked on his college journey, determined to pursue his passion despite anticipating his father's approval. Gary's maturity and cleverness gave me hope that we could manage through potential changes, including divorce. One day, Gary returned from college, visibly distressed, which immediately alarmed me. After some hesitation, he revealed a shocking observation. He had seen Stephen with another woman. Gary's recount of the day highlighted an unexpected turn of events. Intending to attend a lecture that got canceled, he opted to spend time downtown with friends, where he inadvertently witnessed Stephen's betrayal. Gary's attempt to act unaffected in front of his friends couldn't mask his deep discomfort, prompting him to come home early. This revelation, shared in a moment of vulnerability, underscored the complexities of our family dynamics and the challenges we faced ahead. Had I been in Gary's shoes, I might have confronted Stephen immediately, but I understood the dilemma he faced. My suspicions about Stephen's fidelity had been growing, given his recent odd behavior, leaving home early, returning late, and secretive phone calls. It was hard not to suspect something was amiss, prompting me to hire a private investigator to look into Stephen's activities. The investigation confirmed my suspicions. When I shared this with Gary, his surprise was evident, but he supported my calm approach and the possibility of divorce. I had planned to address the issue with Stephen directly, but he did not come home that night, possibly aware that Gary had seen him. When Stephen returned on Sunday, he was not alone, but with a younger woman, Susan, who brazenly introduced herself as his girlfriend. Stephen's declaration of leaving me for Susan, accompanied by his insult about my age, left me in disbelief at his nerve. Yet, I retorted with sarcasm, unfazed by Susan's attempts to belittle me. I confidently assured her of my independence, thanks to my job. Susan, eager to expedite the divorce, produced the papers, which I signed without hesitation, despite her and Stephen's arrogant demands for me to leave our home promptly. Their lack of remorse and entitlement was astonishing. Instead of offering apologies, they were combative, insisting on their right to be together. Their behavior was beyond disrespectful, but I remained composed, secretly holding evidence of Stephen's infidelity that could significantly influence our divorce proceedings. As I walked away, I couldn't help but smirk at the irony of their confidence, already plotting my next moves with a sense of assurance in my eventual vindication. Before starting to pack up my life, I made a call to organize a junk removal service to clear out what I no longer needed. As I began to sort through my belongings, Gary came home. From my room, I could overhear a heated discussion between him and Stephen, which quickly escalated into an argument. Gary was confronting his father about the infidelity, suggesting he owed me an apology. Stephen's dismissive response silenced the exchange, and soon after, the house fell quiet. Curious, I peeked into the living room to find only Gary. He informed me that Stephen and his companion had left for a trip, a revelation that sparked a mix of emotions, but ultimately left me feeling liberated. With Stephen gone, the path was clear for me to enact my plan without interference. I shared my decision to divorce and move out with Gary, who didn't hesitate to support the idea and prepare for the move. When the junk removal team arrived, I instructed them to clear out the contents of 3 specific rooms, ensuring that even new items were included. I was determined to start afresh, leaving behind the old and making room for new beginnings. However, I made a point to leave the living room untouched to avoid any potential backlash from Stephen for disposing of shared assets without his consent. By evening, Gary and I were on our way to a new chapter, with our belongings temporarily stored by a moving company as we hadn't yet settled on a new home. We checked into a nearby hotel, planning a short stay until we found something more permanent. A few days later, Stephen's call interrupted our breakfast. He inquired, somewhat incredulously, about the missing furniture and appliances. I retorted sharply, implying it was his idea, which left him floundering for a response. His hesitant admission and subsequent fumbling for words when he realized the extent of what had been discarded were satisfying. He was particularly concerned about a computer, which I had anticipated and deliberately misled him to believe everything was gone. Feigning innocence, I played along, suggesting that all the essential household items were still intact, leaving him scrambling for the computer he was evidently desperate to find. This interaction, marked by Stephen's obvious desperation and my calculated responses, underscored the shift in our dynamics and the beginning of my strategic move forward. When Stephen discovered I planned to dispose of the computer I had bought for Gary, his desperation became evident. Playing into his urgency, I suggested selling it to him instead of simply giving it back. The idea of buying his own gift back sparked Stephen's interest, but he was taken aback when I proposed an outrageous price of $31,000. His protests only fueled my resolve, and eventually he agreed to the exorbitant sum, a twist that satisfied my craving for a more impactful revenge. I took delight in informing Stephen that the deal was set, but added a twist by telling him he'd have to wait for the computer as it was with the movers, delaying his gratification. Despite his impatience, Stephen had no choice but to comply. Once I had settled into a new home with Gary's assistance, Stephen followed through with the payment. Viewing this as an opportune moment, I encouraged Gary to use the money to establish his independence, setting him up in an apartment close to his college. However, my plan didn't end with the financial transaction. Before sending the computer to Stephen, I removed the external disk, a move that would ensure my revenge reached its peak. I mailed the disk to Stephen's boss at his company, accompanied by a letter that would undoubtedly pique his interest. Upon receiving a call from Stephen's boss, I was invited to visit the company. Upon my arrival, I announced myself at the reception, awaiting the next phase of my plan to unfold, with a sense of anticipation and satisfaction at the unfolding events. This move was not just about revenge, it was about exposing truths, ensuring accountability, and starting anew with a clean slate. Upon my arrival at Stephen's company, I was greeted by Mr. Dennis, the department head, who promptly led me to his office. Inside, a visibly uneasy Stephen awaited, his surprise at seeing me evident as he stood up abruptly. With a calm smile, I announced my intention for revenge, which visibly unsettled him further. Mr. Dennis, looking to address the matter at hand, placed the external disk I had sent on his desk and initiated a discussion about its contents, client data from the company, prohibited from being removed from the office. Stephen's attempts at excuses only deepened his predicament, his discomfort growing under Mr. Dennis's scrutinizing gaze. Reflecting on the events leading to this moment, I remembered how Stephen had been behaving suspiciously before our divorce. One day, I found him using Gary's computer for reasons unknown, given he had his own. Later, my curiosity led me to discover unfamiliar files on the external disk attached to the computer, a database that suggested Stephen had taken company data home, using the computer as a cover. This realization now played out in Mr. Dennis's office as Stephen, cornered by his actions, finally admitted to his wrongdoing. Mr. Dennis, outraged, informed Stephen of the severity of his actions, categorizing them as potential theft, or a violation of legal statutes regarding unfair competition. The mention of pressing charges was the final blow, causing Stephen to break down and plead for forgiveness. The unfolding scene was a stark contrast to the confident demeanor Stephen once held, now replaced by desperation and regret. This encounter was not just about seeking personal vindication, but also about bringing to light actions that compromised professional integrity and legality. As the situation in Mr. Dennis's office escalated, Stephen's breakdown became a stark testament to the consequences of his actions. Internally, I reveled in the justice being served for his betrayal and misconduct. My thoughts of retribution were momentarily interrupted by a knock on the door and the familiar voice of Susan announcing her entrance. Her surprise and subsequent outburst upon seeing me added another layer of complexity to the unfolding drama. Susan's attempt to dismiss me was quickly stifled by her realization of Mr. Dennis's disapproving gaze. The tension in the room escalated as Mr. Dennis directed his inquiry towards Susan, specifically about her plans to start a business in the same industry as their company and her role in managing customer data. It became clear to me that Susan and Stephen had conspired to misuse client data to benefit Susan's nascent business, with Stephen planning to join her later. This revelation stripped away any lingering interest I had in their downfall. Their scheme, predicated on exploiting the hard work of others, seemed pitifully short-sighted. Mr. Dennis, diligent in his responsibilities, revealed that an investigation had uncovered a potential data leak. This development suggested that Susan's actions, possibly in collaboration with Stephen, were under scrutiny for compromising client data integrity. The gravity of the situation was undeniable, with both Stephen and Susan facing serious allegations. Their short-sighted ambition, risking legal and professional fallout for immediate gain, painted a clear picture of desperation and moral bankruptcy. The unfolding events in Mr. Dennis's office underscored a narrative of accountability, revealing the far-reaching implications of unethical conduct in the professional realm. In the thick of their argument, Susan tried deflecting blame onto Stephen, who wasn't having any of it and fired back with accusations of his own. It was a classic case of pointing fingers, each trying to outdo the other in denying responsibility. Amid their heated exchange, I revealed a twist in the tale, evidence of Susan's infidelity, captured in a photograph of her with another man, which I had laid out on the table. This bombshell left Stephen dumbfounded and Susan scrambling for an explanation. Their squabble quickly devolved into a cacophony of excuses and denials, each pettier than the last. Watching them, I couldn't help but remark on the irony of their situation, especially given Stephen's previous disdainful comments about age. The revelation seemed to hit Stephen hard, silencing him momentarily as he pondered his own words. Mr. Dennis, witnessing enough of their drama, stepped in to underscore the seriousness of their actions, reminding them that their personal vendettas had crossed into criminal territory. His firm stance left Susan speechless and marked the beginning of real consequences for their actions. The company wasted no time in taking legal action against both Stephen and Susan for theft, among other charges, further complicating their situation with a civil lawsuit for damages. Susan's aspirations for her business and her personal life both took a nosedive as she faced the repercussions of her actions. As they confronted the legal system, their defenses seemed weak against the solid evidence of their misconduct. The trial loomed large, promising to be a display of justice in action, with both facing potential financial ruin as a result. Through this turmoil, I found peace and a sense of liberation, focusing on my design work and the stability it offered. Gary's personal growth and the potential for future family joys added a layer of happiness to my life. Amid the chaos they created, I reveled in the quiet life I had carved out for myself, a life filled with work satisfaction and the promise of new beginnings.